So Simone, tell us, what made you decide to adopt?
Okay, so I think mine is pretty simple. I married my husband, Bradley. He already had 3 children, which when I married Bradley, the children, my stepkids actually came to live with me. So I've been living with my stepkids since they were about 5, 7 and 8 years old, approximately. Jay, Darren, and Ashley. Well, they don't all live at home anymore, but yes, okay, they're much bigger now. And I always wanted to have my own child, and I was adamant that it was going to be my own child, born of my own womb, because I'm an adopted child, and I never had any issues or negative experiences about being adopted, which I'm sure you'll chat to me about a little later on. But I just was adamant that this child was going to be my own seed, mine and Bradley's. Well, God had other plans. We tried for about a good couple of years, maybe three years before we actually considered adoption. But yes, I adopted my child because I had a desperate need to be a mother, and it didn't happen naturally. And my husband actually suggested, well, why don't we adopt? And a light came on in my head, and I just said, why not? And that was, I started, prayed about it for a little bit, not even very long, and started the process thereafter. So yes, I just wanted to be a mommy.
And how did you share this with your other children?
So I think the kids, especially Ashley, my stepdaughter, my daughter, they also obviously were on the whole let's get pregnant journey, and it never happened. So I think it was just also something natural for them that we would adopt, and the kind of children that they are, such easy, down to earth, great kids, that it was never an issue for them either. I always knew that the child that we adopted would be accepted into the family by their siblings without any hesitation, just because of the kind of children that they are. So yeah, they were all for it and positive about it. I think they just also realized that I so badly wanted to have a child, and I think the idea of them having a younger sister was a sibling was very exciting at the time.
And tell me, your adoption, was it an open adoption, semi-open, or was it a closed adoption?
You know what, Connie, I'm actually not sure of the term it was. Now, I did know, but I forgot. But how it worked with my adoption is I actually obviously had to go through a social worker, and Bradley and I had to put a profile together. This book basically contained our whole life, and a letter to the prospective biological parent. And it really just, you can't really see it very well, but every page of the book tells the biological mother about myself and about Bradley, about the other kids, about the house, about our religion, about what we like, what we don't like, etc., etc. So I poured my life into that book for a couple of weeks, got it printed, and then with regards to our adoption, we could never, we cannot make personal contact with Elia's biological parents, but we can make contact through the agency should we wish to. They are also not allowed to make any personal contact with us. In fact, they don't even know our surnames or the city we live in. But through the agency, they are allowed to ask a question. We're not obliged to give them any information. Our obligation stopped when she was 2 years old. But I think it was just after COVID, her biological mother reached out to the agency, who reached out to me to say that so many people had passed away during COVID and so many people's lives changed that they wanted to know if we were still fine and if Elia was fine, and I obviously happily gave that information away, as well as a long update with pictures and things like that. On the day of her the day I went to Cape Town to fetch her and sign at the magistrate's court, I was actually supposed to meet Bradley, and I were supposed to meet her biological parents. That was planned. But then their parents, her biological parents made contact with the social worker to say that the children have really just gotten over this, this experience, and they're writing exams. And if we could, they just feel that it's not the right time to meet us. So I didn't get to meet them at that point. And yeah, so I think I would call it an open adoption. I'm not sure what you call it, but yeah.
Closed, if
closed,
an agreement to keep the contact, and yeah.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted to know, at what stage did you decide to tell Elia that she was adopted?
So because I have always known as a child, as a small child, that I was adopted, and I don't remember a specific time that my mother ever sat me down to tell me, I decided I just wanted Elia to naturally and fluidly grow up knowing that she was adopted. So from the time she could really understand, I basically made up this little fairy tale, modern day fairy tale, about myself and Bradley and how we wanted a child so badly. And then we prayed, and then guess what? One day the phone rang, and it was an angel saying that there's a baby for us. And I really just went with this for a couple of years. And as she got older, I just became more and more truthful. So there's never been a day that I can remember that she hasn't known that she's adopted.
And now I'm going to speak to you, Miss Elia. Tell me, how does it feel to be adopted, or to know that you're adopted? How do you feel about it?
Okay, she's going to read her answer, if that's fine with you guys. Okay.
I'm proud to be adopted. I love to tell my friends I'm adopted, as being adopted makes me feel very special, because I know that God had his eye on me and he chose me to be with my mom and dad.
Wow, girl. That is so amazing. You are such a lucky girl, let me tell you that. And what do you like about being adopted?
I like being adopted because God blessed me with my family, my school, my dogs, and my church. If I wasn't adopted, I may not have had so many things that I love.
Wow, you are so blessed. Thank you for sharing. I can see you are a very privileged little girl. Hey, Elia, don't you ever forget that.
Yeah.
Thank you to you and mommy for sharing. Oh, you're such a brave girl, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much, guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you. You can go.
Okay, so the next person we're going to go to is Micah Stepanek, the correct pronunciation. So Micah is going to share with, Micah is an adoptee, and she's going to share her story with us, which is very different to Simone's experience. So Micah, tell us, when did you find out you were adopted? What was your experience like? How did you feel growing up as an adoptee? Your sound is off, Micah.
Sorry, how's that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've always known that I was adopted. I can't, just like Simone said, I also can't remember my parents ever sitting down and telling me. It's just something that I've always known. It was something that for me was associated with great shame. I never wanted anybody to know that I was adopted. And of course, people did know. And I think, I'm 48 now, so this was many, many years ago. It was a closed adoption. It was not something that was spoken about in those days, and I don't think there was enough help to really guide the process and perhaps give the support that may have been necessary. My biological mother was taken to a home for unwed mothers. And so I'm sure that that the theme of shame has been something that was very profound. When I was 30 years old, I met my biological mother. And when I was 31, I met my biological father. And they were both very happy to meet me, but their extended family, well, from my biological mother's side, they don't. I think there are two people that know of my existence, and the others don't. So I'm a secret on that side. And on my biological father's side, he was extremely happy. The rest of his family were not aware of my existence until I met my biological father. And they haven't all been very excited about that. So for me, adoption, there's been a lot of loss for me in terms of how I felt growing up. I was not raised in a home that was, my mom is Catholic, my father was Protestant. So we didn't go to church very often. The thought that Elia has, that God has had a special place for that, those were not part of my mode of thinking growing up. And so adoption for me was something that was associated with loss, with rejection, with shame and guilt at the same time, because my parents, I mean, I had a very privileged life. I had a wonderful home that I grew up in, and yet I had so many questions and very few answers. So, when all the kids at school were saying like, "Oh, who do you look like?" Well, I didn't have answers to that question. When I was with my mom, people would say, "Oh, you must look like your father." And when I was with my dad, they said, "Oh, you must look like your mother." And when they saw us together, they'd sort of, well, now who does this child actually look like? So for me, that was very difficult. I was a lot taller than my family was. And so they would say, well, where does this child get this? Where is she? Why is she so tall? And then then they'd said, oh, horse brothers, they are quite tall. And then horse brothers came to visit, and well, they would sort of, so these are the tall brothers, you say. And they were not much taller than I was, and I was a kid. So there was a lot of grief for me, and identity issues and intimacy issues as well, because I didn't feel like I had anybody that I could speak to. I know that my parents were open to speaking if I had questions, but there was a lot that they didn't know, and I could sense that they were uncomfortable because they had struggled so much to try and fall pregnant, and many people had a lot of things to say to them. So no, if you adopt, it's not like being a real mother. And so of course my parents felt like they had, or at least my mother had, there was a lot of pressure for her to feel like she's also a real mother. And so we didn't have a means to actually deal with a lot of the issues, the intimacy issues, the identity issues, the grief and the shame and rejection. I didn't have a vocabulary for those things, and I didn't have really a way of thinking about those things. And so for me now, as a Christian, as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, I can see the many promises in the Bible, where God says, if your mother and your father forsake you, I will take you up. And so I think if children grow up with that sense that God has taken care of them from the womb, I think their frame of mind and the way they think about adoption will be completely different. Because yes, it gave me an opportunity that I wouldn't have had otherwise. It gave me a life that I wouldn't have been able to live had I not been adopted by my parents. So Yeah, I just think that there's a lot of things that need to be considered when parents adopt, the emotional well-being of the child, and how they are spoken about, and how do the rest of the family feel about you adopting a child. Yeah, sorry, do you have any other questions?
Now, you also mentioned that, you growing up in a German family, the differences, and your parents are Italian.
And no, my biological family is Irish and Scottish,
Oh, yes.
respectively. And yes, that was something. My poor parents, they just thought like, no, they're doing something wrong because this child is not ever on time. She's slow. She's, there's no hurrying this child anywhere. And so that compounded things that I think often they felt like they had failed somewhere because I was just so very different. And nowadays we know a lot more about the genetic connection. And if you look at, and it was quite interesting because when I met my biological family, things like the way I sit down, the mannerisms that I have, some of the attitudes even that I had were in line with my biological heritage. But I was given up for adoption. I was 10 days old when my parents received me. I was given up for adoption at birth. So there was absolutely no mirroring that could have taken place. And we really truly underestimate how strong the genes really are. And when parents adopt, they need to take that into consideration, especially if it's a cross-cultural adoption. So even though my parents are Caucasian and I'm a Caucasian, it was still a different culture that I was coming out of. And the mindsets are very, very different. And I was surprised at how ingrained they really are.
Mhm. And if you can give advice to parents who are considering adopting or have adopted, from lessons that you have learned, Micah, what would your advice be?
I would say encourage, show your children how God has led their life, all of their life. Help them be aware that, and celebrate the adoption. For me, it was a great source of shame. I never wanted anybody to know. And unfortunately, Renee will tell you, at my 21st, my dear uncle was asked to give a speech. And whoever did not know that I was adopted, which was nobody except for one lady and her daughter who'd known my parents before they had adopted me, everybody found out at my 21st. So that was really very uncomfortable. So when parents, deal with the losses, because adoption, especially when it comes from an inability to have biological children, there's already a sense of loss. This is not plan A, this is plan B. And even though it's wonderful that we have that opportunity, it starts with a sense of loss. The child has undergone trauma when it's been separated from its mother, because for 9 months it's been in the womb with its mother. It knows its mother's every move, it knows its mother's voice, it's familiar with a completely different person. And now it's taken away. There is trauma that is associated with that really can come out later. When I was a little kid, I didn't have nearly as many struggles as I did as I grew older. When there were questions that couldn't be answered, when the losses felt very, very intense for me. So I think how it's handled and how parents understand, and every situation is different. My situation came from my parents couldn't have children, so there was already a sense of loss for them. And now they say they never ever regretted adopting me, so they were very, very thankful. But there is that sense of loss, and then many times there can be disappointment also. All right, because I was I was a forceps birth, so I had a lot of birthmarks, and I had red hair, and the little baby that was next to me was blonde and blue-eyed and perfect, maybe a C-section baby. And then there is the sense of disappointment and guilt for feeling that disappointment. But the reality is that it was there, you know? So there are a lot of things that I think, if handled correctly and if prayerfully done and with the right support of social workers, I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
And I think it would have been good had you gone for counseling maybe as a child, so that you could have dealt with all the feelings that you were having, but you couldn't say it to your parents.
And the thing is, yes, there is that sense of curiosity and guilt, and at the same time, 48 years ago, people weren't doing counseling like they're doing counseling today. 48 years ago, if you were going for counseling, you had a mental health problem and you were ready to be, incarcerated into a place for people that were mentally completely unstable. So I think times have changed also,
Mhm.
and again, every situation is unique.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Micah, for sharing with us. And thank you for being so honest. That is appreciated because it helps people who are watching this, to prevent themselves from making the same mistakes. I was saying to Micah when we chatted, at one stage in my life, I wondered if I was adopted, and I looked at my siblings and I would look for similarities. And then my one brother and I look so much alike. And then that settled it for me, kind of, because I thought we could never look so much alike. And then me being adopted, because I was the youngest of the five. And so I realized, I've got to belong to this family. But it's just crazy things that go through your mind as a child. And sometimes you
Yes,
don't have the courage to speak to your parents about it because they're not open to that. So, yeah, but thanks so much, Micah. So we're going to go to Renee now. Renee has got children, and I don't think Renee planned on adopting, but please share your story with us, Renee.
So I have a daughter that's laughing and a husband at that planned thing, because I am a planner and this was not planned, yes. My story is a little different in that it never even entered my mind having another child. It was just so far removed from my reality. And in the midst of that, there was a need and I felt God's calling. But remember that I knew Micah already. So me and Micah had met at while we were at varsity. I had some friends that had chosen not to have children and adopt. So when Eleanor initially came to us, she was 5 weeks old and she was just incredibly sick, And it was more that I was a place of safety. I was helping her to get healthy. She was then taken, and then when her health deteriorated, 10 days later, she was brought back. And then my husband said, no, she'll leave if they've got a place for her, like a safe place for her where she'll be adopted, cared for, that type of thing. So initially, my idea was to help her biological, or when I speak to her, I speak to her as her person X and her person Y, to help them sort of find their way and find themselves to a place of health and wellness so that they'd be able to take care of her. Because I thought that because I'd heard so many stories, that was the best option. And it was only a year after Eleanor had been with us for a year, and a social worker said to me, that these were adults and they had had all the opportunities life had to offer. But that they would take Eleanor and put her with somebody that could protect her and nurture. And then I thought to myself, I didn't want that for her. And that's when I decided to adopt. Edgar decided after Eleanor had been with us for 2 months, Edgar was sure we were going to adopt. But, I still had this hope that adults would adult And the point is, I listen to Micah, and we live in a broken world with broken humans. And we have so many children in desperate need because of choices that they never made. And that heartache, I always say to my adoptive children that I never underestimate the privilege that is mine. I understand that my privilege is based on somebody else's heartache, that somebody else's brokenness and somebody else's dysfunction or whatever led to one of my greatest blessings in my life. And this is not lost on me. I'm very aware of it. And I think because I have biological children, it's a little different because I did belong to a support group at one stage. And I find that many adoptive parents that have no biological parents, they have like false expectations. And many people said to me, that, oh, she would reject me one day. She'd always long for her biological parents, But that is true for biological children too. They reject their parents. They also do things that are heartbreaking. They also, like you, feel different and out of place, and I have those feelings. But I also have a very phenomenal support system. So as much as I just choose where to place my focus. So in our case, it's always assumed that our adoption is a cross-racial adoption because my daughter's dark. And there's all this type of racial slurs, and it was the church there was just so many but from the first day Eleanor was placed in my arms, I knew that this was a journey of faith between me and God. So my parenting and my adoption story is more one of me saying yes to God, not knowing that God was placing one of the biggest blessings of my life in my life. Sometimes you think you're doing something for God, but you're actually doing nothing for God. God is actually doing everything for you. And people often say to me, oh, she's so lucky, but she's not lucky. I'm lucky. I'm lucky to have this experience. I'm lucky to see God work in a life. I'm lucky to see God rewrite DNA. I'm lucky to see God heal a broken body. I'm lucky to see God provide for needs that I never ever thought. I'm lucky when the money is finished that the bills are there because God does that. I'm lucky to see God take lungs that were broken and make them strong. I'm lucky to see her alive at this stage. I'm lucky. I don't actually think, I think I'm lucky. So, yeah. But I mean, I worked a different, I said that, so I was first a place of safety for my daughter. We became a place of safety, and there were many things I've done wrong in the process. Things were not perfect, things were not planned. All I can say is I've tried to follow where God has led, and I see some people on the forum that have been a great support to me, that have prayed me through, that have held up my hands, that have, and we all need that. We need a village, we need a church family. So I think why I agreed to take part in this conversation is that with the awareness, there needs to be things that we don't say. There needs to be ways that we approach people. The church needs to become more aware, because I've always told my daughter, there was not a time that she didn't know she was adopted. But I mean, she was 18 months old the first time somebody asked her where her real mom was. That's not okay. That's not okay. So the reason I'm on this forum is because we need to create some sort of awareness so that our churches are safe places for people that are adopting, so that people don't make reference to your child not being your child and where's your real parent, or I want real children. No, they are just, even our vocabulary needs to change. Oh, that's my point of view.
Thank you so much, Renee, for sharing. And yeah, sometimes it's sad when children that are adopted find out from other people, or other people say things that create such awkwardness when the parents have maybe not had the conversation because the child is maybe not old enough. I personally had a cousin, and she wanted to know who her father was. And it's not because she didn't love her adoptive father. It's just that she wanted to know. And I think that's, a lot of
Yeah.
children go, they just want to know. It's not that they want to reject their adoptive parents or anything, because we are curious as human beings, and there's nothing wrong with that, So Renee, is there anything you want to add maybe before? How did you share this with your extended family that you are adopting? Were they supportive? Were they open to it?
Look, Eleanor had been with us for more than a year before we even brought up this topic of adoption. And by then, everybody was quite tired of us not adopting. It was sort of a, when are you guys? Just stop it now. Just adopt this child, please, And I think my dad, when Eleanor was about 2, and of course, I have no memory of being 2. But Eleanor, my father was looking at Eleanor and he said he had so many questions for God when he got to heaven. But now he just wants to ask the Lord how he took my DNA and put it in this little child, because he remembers me at 2, and he couldn't sort of believe some of the things that was being done. And I think for anybody that's considering it, let us not underestimate the power of prayer, because let me tell you, there's been great loss in areas of our lives. And God, in his mercy, he brings people together. He puts the broken into families. The Bible says it and he does it. So you, mommy, that thinks maybe I can't have or whatever, your arms were made for that little person. They were made for that. Your heart was built for that. You have it. You have everything you need. We are complete in Christ, and this person can be complete in Christ because we live in a broken world with broken humans. And we are supposed to be reconciled to each other and reconciling each other to Christ. And adoption, God calls us his adopted children because adoption is a choice. But in the case of our spiritual adoption, we choose our parent. And lots of our children didn't choose us, we chose them. But it's that same spirit of, and I pray that one day when my daughter is old, she'll choose me, that she will choose to step into a certain relationship. But there are so many blessings. There is such a spiritual journey that there's so much about the heart of God, about unselfish love, about really just the healing that comes when we allow God to work in us and through us, that I feel I've only experienced this way,
And I thank you so much for sharing and for being so open, and for sharing your journey. We appreciate it. We appreciate the honesty, and you are all very lucky to have each other. And it was,
yes, we are.
It was meant to be. So we're going to go over to Sanette. Sanette is a social worker. She has adopted children as well. So she's going to share with us her experience and a bit more. Many people are scared of adopting because the process is so long. And sometimes when kids are placed with people to foster, I've heard a lot of them saying, I'm so scared I get too attached to the child, just now they take the child away, so those are all the fears that people have if they consider adopting. But Sanette, can you share your experience with us, please? As a social
Good evening.
as a parent.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Sanette van Moerkerken. I'm the program manager at Springs Child Welfare. Yes, I'm in the lucky position that that I am a social worker as well as having children that I've adopted. So some of the things that the other speakers have shared, we've also experienced to a little bit of extent. So I sort of feel like saying thank you to everyone that shared their personal things, because it's quite personal to share something in terms of how you felt as a child that was adopted, as a mother who has adopted a child, and obviously as Renee, who has been a place of safety and ended up adopting the child. So a lot of my information is more on the legal side. So please, if I don't make sense and there's anyone that has questions, please just ask and I'll answer as best I can. So Connie sent me a few questions that I think she got from the congregation, or she drew up herself, I'm not sure, just to guide me in terms of what kind of information I can share with you or need to share with you. So yes, unfortunately, adoption is not a process that you decide today you want a child and tomorrow you get a child and in a month's time the adoption is through. Unfortunately, there's lots of processes that needs to happen in terms of that. Maybe I can just start off by sharing which people are allowed to adopt children. According to the Children's Act, now that's the act that's our Bible, stating that which people can adopt children. So it talks about a husband and a wife can do it jointly. Partners in a permanent domestic life partnership, same or hetero, can adopt. People sharing a common household and forming a permanent family unit by a widow, single people, a widower, a divorced person, an unmarried person. And as a social worker, my organization dealt with adoptions until 2010. When the new Children's Act came about in 2010, I took the decision to not register our organization because the Act then came with a lot of things that were expected of the aftercare in terms of helping the people through the process and still having contact with them afterwards. And at the time, I was the only social worker that had 5 years experience, and I didn't think that it was something that I could deal with. I am considering at the moment, in the light of this whole situation with our subsidies and the SUFI that I'm sure most of you heard about over the news, to register as a private social worker and maybe at some stage do deal with adoptions. So my experience with adoptions was mostly with step-parent adoptions. If a husband wants to adopt his wife's children, or the wife wants to adopt the husband's children. So the situation was a little bit different. We never dealt with situations where a young mother would come to the office and say, I'm going to have this baby. I've decided I want the baby to be adopted. Please assist me in finding fit and proper adoptive parents for my child. So the information that I'm sharing with you, I spoke to a few colleagues that are dealing with adoptions at the moment. One is a private social worker and the other one is involved with an NGO. So a lot of the information, I just wanted to make sure that what I experienced when I was doing adoptions hasn't changed that much before sharing it, because I think Connie also said to you, I'm not doing adoptions at the moment, but we deal with adoptions in terms of if our foster parents want to adopt a foster child, then we put them in contact with a private social worker, and she then assists them throughout the whole process. So I know the process, so that's more or less what I'm going to share with you guys tonight. So as you know, or might not know, biological fathers do not have parental rights and responsibilities when they have a child with a lady. So if they have a child and they want to and they decide to separate, then the father needs to approach court to get parental rights and responsibilities. When they are not married, the father never has guardianship. A father, a biological father, if he's not married to the mother, only gets guardianship if he adopts his own child. I know it sounds strange and silly, but guardianship remains with the biological mother if they are not married. Obviously, when they're married, it's 50-50 and the guardianship is shared. But unmarried fathers do not have guardianship. They can approach court to get rights in terms of having contact to the child, having the right to contribute to the child's living expenses or wherever the child is staying. Then he can apply through court to get those rights. And if the parents do not agree with regards to contact, then parenting plans can be drawn up. But a biological father also needs to adopt his own child if he's not married to the biological mother. I just wanted to give a little bit of background with regards to that, because I think everyone thought when the new Children's Act came that the fathers automatically acquired some rights, which unfortunately is not true. In terms of the Act, if they qualify in terms of 3 of the 4 or 5 criteria, then they can approach court and apply and be awarded care. Sometimes, if the mother is unable to care for the child, the court can allow them to have care of the child, but guardianship always remains with the biological mother. Okay, obviously, like I said, foster parents can also adopt children. So prospective adoptive parents must be screened by the social worker in terms of looking at their fit, at whether they are fit and proper. Now that changes, because my perception of what is fit and proper can differ from a social worker that is at another organization or somewhere else. So it basically comes down to what situations you see as fit and proper. So if I go into a house, I wouldn't expect, if people want to adopt, that all of their children must have their own rooms. There must be 3 bathrooms and things like that. You look at what the family setting is, and based on that, you decide whether the family is fit and proper to adopt. We have a lot of our African families that stays in shacks and RDP houses, which we know are not big houses that they stay in, but that does not limit us from allowing that person to adopt. At the end of the day, one looks at whether they're able to care for the child adequately, whether they can be a parent for the child, because everything in adoption is about the best interest of a child. It's not about whether the people are rich or poor or have a big house or a small house. It's with regards to what is in the best interest of the child. Okay. One of the ladies spoke previously about different cultures. Yes, that's definitely something that plays a role. And I know that the NGOs that are dealing with adoptions look at that, and they look at the family dynamics in terms of how the family feels. If it's maybe an African child that comes into a white family. I haven't dealt with any matches where a white child went into an African family. I think it was always the other way around. Now, personally, with our adoptions, I know that my father-in-law was always against adoptions, because he grew up with his parents adopting 2 girls, and they ended up, in his view, abusing his parents in terms of sponging off them. They always wanted them to help them financially. So when we adopted, we knew that this was his perception with regards to that. And at the end of the day, we just said that as a nuclear family, it was our decision. And he was never rude or ugly to my daughter when we initially adopted her, and neither to my son when we adopted him. But I always knew that was his feeling with regards to adoption, and I hope that he unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, but that he saw that it wasn't something that because he perceived it as negative, adoption as a whole, that it will always be a negative situation. So in our situation, it does influence the situation, because family has an influence on what happens in a family, especially if it's grandparents and they are close to their family, then they do have an effect. But I think he always respected our decision in terms of both adoptions. So so that's good. But it is a family decision. And I think, like Micah explained, that it was like a family secret that she was adopted, although she knew she was adopted. But it shouldn't be like that, because then it makes a child think that he or she have to be ashamed of the fact that they have been adopted. So it's important that children from a young age know that they are adopted, but that the family also know that, and that assistance nowadays, unfortunately, like Michael also said, 48 years ago, when she was adopted, things were very different. In terms of how the social workers dealt with adoptions, in terms of giving emotional support, in terms of assisting if there's going to be an open or a disclosed adoption, like Simone and them had, or Simone had. They draw up the book with all of the information and photographs and their likes and dislikes, so that if they adopt, that the mother can go through the profiles and see which one she likes. And in their case, they were going to meet the biological parents. So in a way, it became an open adoption if they were to meet them. But because they didn't meet them, it sort of then became a disclosed adoption. So usually when either the person, usually with adoptions, it's the first names that are given to the biological parents, and the adoptive parents will also know the first name of the biological mother or the birth mother and the biological father. So surnames are not shared, addresses aren't shared. But that's part of the process that the NGOs do. So when I was speaking to one of my colleagues, they have a process where the adoptive parents comes for sessions to their office for a whole week, where they explain to them everything with regards to adoption, how it works in terms of if the parents are known and they sign adoptions, that there's a 60-day waiting period. If it's older children or children that are more mature, they also have the right to sign for if they want to be adopted, and they can also after 60 days recant their permission. Both the child and the biological parents can. With babies and abandoned babies, it's a little bit different, because usually the parents aren't known, or they give false names to the hospital social workers. In those cases, it's basically just the advert that has to run for 6 months. And some of the courts do not place the babies like they did with Renee and the baby that was placed with them. But in her case, it wasn't going to be an adoption from the beginning. Usually, if it's abandoned babies and the organization know that this is going to be a baby that's going to be available for adoption, then those babies are usually placed in institutions where, so that the advert can run, all of the legal things that need to happen can run. And if that 90 days is over and there's no one that comes forward, then they can proceed in getting the court to declare the child adoptable child, because that's very important in any situation, that the court needs to, after the social worker provides court with a report, say that this child is adoptable based on 1, 2, 3. Either the parent signed off, or the child was abandoned, the advert had run for 90 days and no one has come forward to say, but it's my child, I now want my child, or whatever the situation might be. So there's a register that's called a register for unadoptable children and prospective adoptive parents that the NGOs that are dealing with adoptions have. So the adoptable children are placed on that register, and the screened prospective adoptive parents are placed on those registers. So the organizations, what they do is, if they have babies available for adoption, they would go into the register and they would say, if you say you want to be an adoptive parent, then you usually say, I want a baby, or I want a child that's 2 years old, or I want a bigger child, maybe 4 years or 5 years old. So then they put in the register that the person, these children are available, and then they try and match parents together. And that's how they, with abandoned babies, get adoptive parents for them. With situations where, like Renee and them have been involved with, is where their names are then drawn and they are then called to the institution to then go through the process, or the mother, if there's a mother, she then looks through the profiles. If there's no mother, then obviously if their name comes up from the register and they screened already, then the process starts in contacting them and saying, are you interested in this child? We have a I think the register, how I was explained, it was set up is 0 to 2 years, and then it goes up from there. So a lot of people want to say, I want babies, but very few people are going to get babies that are 10 days old, like Renee did, because if they are abandoned, like I previously said, then it's a 90-day period for the advert to run, and thereafter they will be matched with a family, and the process in terms of the court process will happen. So that in itself, I think, is also a bit of a challenge, because some of the presiding officers, the social workers that are dealing with adoptions need to then go to court and say, I have this child that's available for adoption. I have these people that have been screened and counseled, and all of the processes has happened, and now we want to start the adoption process. Then they have to make an appointment with a presiding officer for the people then to apply to have the child adopted. So depending on how soon the court gives them a date, that also prolongs the process. One of the courts, I believe, takes about 8 months before you, when you go and say, I have a baby that can be placed, they take 8 months before they actually give you a date for the whole process to start. And in that time, the baby usually isn't then placed with a couple until the process at court has happened. So a lot of the things that are happening is dependent on court. It's dependent on if there's psychological or psychometric assessments that the people have to undergo. All of those things are part of the process, and in terms of how long it will take. And then eventually, if the process is now concluded at court, the adoption was done, then the social worker has to provide a report for the Department of Social Development to explain that this child is adoptable. The court has confirmed that this child is adoptable, and they then have to issue a letter in terms of Section 239 of the Children's Act saying that they agree that these people who are applying for the adoption are suitable and that the child is adoptable. And then the process goes back to court, and then court ends up making an order stating that this child is now adopted. Now, usually that is a final order that was made in terms of the adoption has happened. Sorry, bye. Lekker slappies. Sorry, my grandson just wants to say goodnight. So, so court then signs the order to say that the baby or the child is now the adoption has been made an order of court. Now, unfortunately, to the adoption, then the people can go to Home Affairs and they can go and apply. Now, unfortunately, so like I say, there's all of these. It's court, it's the Department of Social Development, then it's court again, then it's the Department of Social Development, then it's Home Affairs. And sometimes I get very frustrated with all of these departmental organizations that are actually not always assisting one as quick as one would like to. So when one then ends up going to Home Affairs, then you will be allowed to change the child's name if you haven't chosen the name for the child when the child was registered, and obviously the child's surname. So you apply then at Home Affairs to do that process, and then that also takes sometimes 6 months to 1 year before there's actually a birth certificate issued. Now we've had the unfortunate situation where in 2021 we had 3 foster parents that wanted to adopt the children. So we put them in contact with a private social worker that she did the adoption. The whole process went through court, and then it went to the Registrar of Adoptions, and more than a year later, nothing happened. They never received any documents. So from our office, we then started inquiring from, I then made a few phone calls and got email addresses and telephone numbers, and I started emailing and saying, these adoptions have been concluded at court, send them copies of the court orders, and then wanting to inquire when when we are going to receive these documents, whether children are registered, because I think one of the children were supposed to start school this year or next year. So it was quite an urgent thing to have this process finalized. So after a long battle, we ended up getting the documentation, and the people have gone to Home Affairs. But as far as I know, they haven't been able to. They haven't received the birth certificates yet. So there's unfortunately a lengthy process. Yes, that's unfortunately where we are at in South Africa in terms of things that need to happen. Even with my son's adoption, unfortunately it wasn't something that we decided from the beginning. When he came to us when he was 15, we were going to adopt him. He ended up when he was about 17, continuously saying, but he wants our surname. He doesn't want to have his surname anymore. He wants our surname. And like I previously explained, he came from an abusive home, badly abused. His dad is still in prison for the abuse that is done on him, as well as how we emotionally abuse the rest of the family. But he was physically abused very badly. So my husband and him didn't have a good relationship from the beginning. Although he didn't respect his mom either, him and I have a much better relationship than him and my husband. So it took my husband quite a while to get to the point where we decided now he's ready to do this. So when he told me, we were looking at our wills, and he said to me, I've written our son, because we called him our son from the beginning, into the will. I knew he was ready for the next step. So obviously we went for the adoption, and it was just before he turned 18. Actually 2 days before he turned 18, the court made the order that he was adopted. So then we had a problem with Home Affairs saying, but he's 18, he's an adult now, he can't get a new birth certificate. But in any event, after a lot of fighting, they ended up giving him another birth certificate. And that also had problems of its own, because in the meantime, he had a driver's license in his old surname. Then we adopted him. Now we are still battling to get the Department of Transport, I think, to combine the fact that he has a driver's license and match it with his new surname. So he's walking around with his driver's license in his old surname, and he's got an ID in his new surname. So, but for now he hasn't gotten into trouble. So we are happy about that. So screening for adoptive parents, we already spoke a little bit about fit and proper, which is open for interpretation by any person who does adoptions in terms of what they perceive as being fit and proper in terms of the household, in terms of the family. Obviously, the people must be permanent residents in South Africa, or they must be South African citizens. It's not people from another country that doesn't have permanent residency in South Africa cannot, if they have asylum or things like that, they usually are not allowed to adopt children. You have to be a permanent resident or a South African citizen. If you are you can, if a person registers on the register that I previously mentioned, they are on the register for a period of 3 years. And I assume, as I said, I don't work with it. If after 3 years they are not matched with a child, then there's a process that they can follow if they still want their name to be on the register and be considered for children in the future. Now, I think everyone knows that that white children are very scarce in terms of having children available for adoption. Usually, if there's white children, it's family members that know someone who knows someone that's having a baby, and the someone knows someone who can't have children, and they usually link them up together. So I know from what I've heard in meetings that there's a lot of African children available for adoption. So most of the people are being screened that are willing to take African babies, and obviously if there are white families that are interested in doing that, then the screening process changes a little bit in terms of they involve the grandparents, they involved sisters and uncles and things like that. So to make sure that if this child is placed in the family, that the child is not going to experience rejection. Because for instance, in my family, my mom is 76, my dad is 75. My mom wouldn't have a problem at all if we would have an African child in our household. But my dad will definitely have a problem with that. So one has to look at how the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles will also perceive a child if a child is placed in a household that's not the same race as the family that's adopting the child. So a lot of testimonies are also going along with the screening process. I understand about 5 testimonies have to be given to the agency. So medicals of the adoptive parents are needed. Police clearances are required, especially to see if the adoptive parents have ever been found guilty of a violent crime. Not always necessarily against a child, but any violent crime. And obviously they will make a decision based on that. If the person has done something wrong 20 years ago and hasn't been arrested for anything in the meantime, then obviously that organization can decide, yes, we can consider the person, or no, we can't consider the person. I for instance, dealt with an adoption where the man wanted to adopt his wife's son. And when we got the police clearance, he had been found guilty of murder. When he was 16 years old, him and a bunch of friends were in a bar, and they ended up drinking and fighting, and all sorts of things happened. So he ended up landing the last blow to a bloke, and he died. And none of them were taking responsibility for what had happened. So at the end of the day, he was the only one that was found guilty and went to prison for that. But it was something that happened like 20 or 25 years ago at the time. I can't remember now. But it was something that I needed to consider. And obviously it's something that you share with court. And then the presiding officer will also have a say in whether they agree that the adoption can go through. And that's also part of the process that the Department of Social Development does when they give the Section 239 letter, saying that despite the father's or the mother's criminal record, it happened a long time ago, and they feel that the people can still be deemed as fit and proper to continue with the adoption. So some of the organizations that deal with adoption do have psychosomatic testing for the adults. I haven't heard of it before, but they also do sand therapy with adults. It's like play therapy with children and toys, apparently through the sand, and the adults building something through the sand. They also the person who does the assessment with regards to how they deal with things like that can then also draw some conclusions in terms of the people and their personalities and what things are happening in the family. So it depends on the NGO and what things they expect from the people to do. But definitely it's medicals, the Form 30s, the police clearance, the psychosomatric testing. And if they feel that there are other things, then they have that. When we went through the adoption or the placement with my son in the beginning, the organization that was dealing with us ended up sending us for an interactional analysis, because at the time my daughter was staying with us and her child was staying with us from a previous marriage. So the organization wanted to see how we all interact with him, and based on that, those things were included when he was placed with us in foster care. With the adoption, it worked a little bit differently because he had already been in foster care with us for a while. We didn't go through that process again. So it was basically just a social worker doing the home visit, doing the reports, and then we ended up following the process of the 239 at the Department of Social Development, and then going to court and the adoption being approved by court. So a lot of people I know think that adoption is this huge amount of money. In some instances, unfortunately, with private social workers, it can be a huge amount of money because the Act does not limit private social workers in which amounts they are allowed to charge people. So you will hear of people that pay 100,000 Rand for adoptions. That's the highest amount that I've heard of. But the organizations, the non-profit organizations that are doing adoptions, they have a sliding scale when they look at the people's income, and based on their income, they then decide what they must pay, and if they can't pay the full amount, then they can pay off. So what I understood from the organization that I spoke to is usually about 10,000 Rand. On the internet, I saw it can differ from 10,000 to 25,000. Now I know some of the tutela organizations charge 25,000 Rand for adoptions if they do the adoptions. So it differs. It depends on who does the adoption. But the non-profit organizations are limited in terms of what amounts they can charge. And I think that's where the 25,000 Rand comes in, that they're not allowed to charge more. So they're allowed to charge less, but not more. But private social workers, unfortunately, sometimes charge exorbitant amounts of money. And sometimes people pay that because they feel I'm going to get my money's worth, and then they pay whatever amount the social worker, if in private practice, is charging them. So I think we've already spoken a bit about the periods, and unfortunately that can take a while. The organization that I was communicating with spoke about as long as 2 years for the whole process to be completed, from the advertising, from the placement, from court making an order, from the order coming back from the registrar, going to Home Affairs. It can take about 2 years before the whole process is actually concluded and the child is registered with new, as if the child have new birth parents. With adoptions, the birth register is changed. For instance, my name and my husband's name is now in the birth register for my son, but the people who are dealing with the registers, if these young children grow to be adults and they want to trace their parents, and it might be a situation where it was abandoned baby, obviously the registrar won't have information about them on the register, but somehow these children always end up finding their biological parents through social media, through any which way possible. The social worker actually said to me yesterday that apparently they do not encourage people to put a lot of pictures on social media, because apparently there's some people that are so clever with social media that they can based on the structure of your face, can somehow trace you to a family or to a biological parent, which is actually scary to think of. So it's something that they do not encourage, and especially if the parents, like for instance in Simone's case, they knew what the mom's name was. So sometimes people will go and Google them, or go on Facebook and see if they can find them and things like that. And the NGO also does not encourage that, because unfortunately, if they then end up finding the biological parents, then the situation changes a little bit, because some biological parents might think, well, now I can get money from them for the fact that I've given them a child, or something like that. So there's lots of things that the NGOs explain to the prospective adoptive parents that they need to be careful of when they have the child in their care, and how they deal with information about the biological parents. So what I understood was that if there's information available about the biological parents, the NGOs do not, like for instance, say maybe that the baby was born from a rape, or the mother was thrown out of her family because they found out that she was pregnant, or whatever bad situation happened for the mother to make the decision to give the child up for adoption. The organization shares that information with the adoptive parents, but not for them to have the information and then to go and tell the whole family that this child now comes from a rape and all of those information. Though that information is basically just to give the adoptive parents some idea of where the biological parents are coming from, if that information is in fact known. And sometimes some medical information is also given to the prospective adoptive parents, because obviously if there is hereditary sicknesses in the family, then it's better for the family to know that, so that if the child starts exhibiting some symptoms of a sickness, that they know where it comes from, or that it's more easier to identify this is what might be wrong with the child. So there's a lot of information that the organizations do share with the adoptive parents, but it's not usually information that they want the adoptive parents to share with the child necessarily. It's basically just to give them some background. So with these groups that they have with the adoptive parents, they also help them to come up with a story. Like Simone was saying that she made up this fairy tale story to tell to her daughter how she landed up coming to stay with them. Now, the NGOs also have something similar in the period that they are helping the adoptive parents to understand what is happening, what is the legal processes. They also help them in getting the story together, so that when the child is of an age where he or she can understand, that they do explain to the child that you have a tummy mommy, and you have us as your adoptive parents. We chose to adopt you, so that the child can feel that, but they wanted me. It's not like I just landed on their doorstep and they had to take me. Now, some children have some issues with regards to if they find out that they are adopted and it's not been dealt with in a manner where they know about that from a young age. We dealt with a young boy that when he was 12 years old, he found out that he was adopted. He was playing in the streets with his friends, and they asked him, where's his parents? Why is he staying with his grandparents? And he explained to them, no, it's my mom and my dad. And they said, but they are old. How can they be your mom and your dad? So he ended up asking his mom whether she's his mom or whether she's his grandmother. And eventually she ended up telling him he was adopted. He was 12 years old. Emotionally, this boy had a lot of problems after that. He didn't know how to deal with that. So when children are adopted, Simone also alluded to that, they are not allowed to trace their biological parents, and the biological parents are not allowed to trace them until they are 18 years old. If for whatever reason the court then deems it fit, that the information can be made available to the adopted child before he or she turns 18, then we need to provide reports to court to explain why it's necessary to have that. Now, with this boy, we ended up getting a psychologist that provided a report to say that this boy is not dealing with knowing that he's adopted very well. He's got problems at school. He's defiant. He's difficult at school. Can we please assist? So we ended up getting permission from court to look at the information that we had at the time we did the adoption. He was in foster care first, and then obviously it went over into adoption. So luckily we traced the mom, but then we had to somehow coach the mom in terms of what information she gives this young man and what information she doesn't give him, because unfortunately he was from she was with a man and she had older children with a man. Then they were separated at some stage and she had a fling with, I don't know whether it was a married man or an unmarried man. She had the baby. No one ever knew she was pregnant. She gave the baby up for adoption. She went back to her first boyfriend or husband and had more children with him. Now this 12-year-old, you can't go and tell him that he's got older half siblings and he's got younger half siblings and he's not allowed to get to know them. So we had to coach the mom in what information she was allowed to give him. And at the time, the information that we ended up sharing with her that she can give to him without letting him know he's got other siblings, hope he functioned. And then the strangest thing happened. This year he comes back and he wants to know who his biological father is. He's now 18, over 18. So now we have to try and trace the mom again and see if she still stays at the same address where we traced her the last time, and see if she's willing to give us that information. If she's not willing to give us that information, unfortunately, that we don't even have that information in the file. And when we did, and if we did, we still had the responsibility to try and trace him and speak to him and find out if he wants to have contact with his child. Because sometimes with situations like this, it's like one of the ladies said, it's like no one knew. That's, I think Micah said that no one knew that her parents had a child, that they had given up for adoption when she met them. So sometimes in situations like that, the men moves on, have other children. Their children do not know that he had another child. So it becomes a very complicated situation. So one needs to speak to the biological parents and not just give the adoptive children the information to go and do with it what they want in terms of it's my right to make contact with my biological parent, or whatever the story might be, regardless of whether it's just to make contact or whether it's others, do I have sisters? Because some children do want to know that. I dealt with a situation a few years ago where a lady, they gave her and the boyfriend at the time gave up a child for adoption. They later married and had 2 more children. And on the lady's deathbed, they told the 2 younger children that they actually have an older sibling that the parents has given up for adoption. And strangely enough, that was, they then contacted us and say, we did the adoption. They want to find the older sibling. And I think a few months into this whole process, the older sibling communicated with us and say, but I want to find my biological parents. And that was some of the feel good things in doing adoption, that when you could put them together and allow them to come together and get to know each other and form relationships again, it felt like giving birth to something, getting the lady together with her younger siblings, and her father was still alive at the time. So it doesn't happen often, but it was a feel-good story because it was a different situation. She inquired, the siblings inquired, so it was quite a nice thing to be able to tell her, but you know what, your siblings want to get to know you as well. Here's the contact details. They ended up deciding that they wanted to meet on their own. They didn't want us to assist in the meeting process. They felt it was something that they could deal with on their own. Unfortunately, I never knew, I never got feedback after that to hear how it went and what happened after that. But I assume no news is good news. So sometimes things happen in terms of adoption and putting children and other siblings together that makes you feel like it's something that God worked in that way that we would be able to put them together as a family. So we also spoke about how adoption affects the family and friends. Well, obviously it does, because if you have family and friends that do not accept adoption, you need to be the one to decide how is it going to affect the child, because at the end of the day, it's about the child's best interest. It's not about whether you want a child or like Simone and them, they tried to have a child, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And then they decided, well, adoption is the next step for us. But it's something that apart from the nuclear family, the rest of the family also have to buy into that, because obviously if there are family members that are going to deal with it in a derogatory manner and make the adoptive child feel that he or she's not really part of the family because they are not biologically related to the adoptive parents, that's something that needs to be dealt with, because it's not something that's just going to go away if the family decides that they are going to go ahead with the adoption. It's something that as a family they need to decide together how they are going to deal with it. So obviously situations are different. I heard from Renee that she had children of her own. Then this baby came into the family. That's obviously also some things that are being considered with adoptions, is that when a child is adopted, you usually do not want the oldest child to lose his or her place in the family. So you wouldn't necessarily, if the family have a 4-year-old, go and place a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old with the family, because the elder children are much more how can I put it? They want their place. I'm the oldest one. They don't want to necessarily. They might be happy for a while. I have an older brother or an older sister, but it's not something that's going to last. So usually with adoptions, if there are biological children involved or stepchildren involved, you look at ages of the children that the people are wanting to adopt, and give them guidance in terms of if they are looking at an older child, why it shouldn't be an older child and rather a younger child. And obviously they also communicate with the children and make them to also understand what is happening. Because if the children are old enough to understand that there's now a new child coming into the family, especially if it's an older child and now suddenly there's a baby, and mom's attention is now going to move over to the baby, then it's something that the organization then deals with the family in terms of get the young child involved with the mom to bath the child or to dress the child or to do whatever, like in a normal family. If you have a baby, then obviously if you have older children, you involve them in the child's care and bathing and clothing and feeding, sometimes if they are old enough to help with the feeding part. So you treat that child as if the child is yours. The child should never feel that they just took me because no one else wanted me. It must be because they wanted me in their family. So it's something that they definitely need to talk to each other about that. Okay, contact with birth parents. You spoke previously about post-adoption agreements. Post-adoption agreements is if the parents are known to the adoptive parents and they want to have contact with the child in terms of maybe having a picture or maybe seeing the child once a year. That's usually a joint agreement that's drawn up between the prospective adoptive parents and the birth parents. And it must be an agreement that they both agree on. It can't be an agreement where the parents say, this is what I want, and the adoptive parents have no say in terms of what they are willing to do. So obviously there's a lot of mediation going into a post-adoption agreement. And then once the adoption, if the agreement has been agreed upon, that forms part of the court order that's issued. If there's certain agreements in terms of contact and pictures and things like that, not directly to each other, but also through the agency that did the adoption, pictures can be shared, and contact can also happen at the NGO's premises. So it doesn't need to be at the prospective adoptive parent's house. So there's ways of dealing with the contact if that was something that they agreed upon. But most of the time it's abandoned babies that the NGOs are dealing with. So there won't be parents involved, and there won't be contact, and there won't be things involved like that. So sometimes if the adoptive parents feel that they have some problems with bonding with the child, then the NGOs also have people that assist with bonding therapy, helping the parents to bond with the child. If there's other children that are also having some challenges with having the child in the family, then that child can also be involved in bonding therapy, in just helping the family to to connect as a family with this new little baby in the family, or if it's an older child in the family, and how to deal with that. So yeah, that was just in short in terms of what I could think of answering. So I know it's a lot of information, but I hope I've given you some practical examples as well, so that you can understand that that adoption is not an easy thing to go through, and it's obviously not a mom and dad, the mom decides and the dad just goes along. It's unfortunately like with foster care, it's a family decision, because everyone has to be involved in making decisions with regards to what age group we take, what gender we take, how it will affect our family, and things like that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share. So if there are questions, I'll happily answer whatever I can.
Thank you so much, Sanet. Thank you for all the information. I think it's so important, and often, you don't think about all of these things when considering adopting, but I think people have a very good idea of what to expect now if should they consider adopting. Now, Lady has a question. Now, Lady, you can unmute yourself and please ask the question.
Hello everyone. I just
Hi.
have a question. Is it possible that you'd pay the NGO or the social worker for adoption and then not be placed with the child?
As far as I know, there can probably be some things that happen to prevent that, but from the information I have, it doesn't usually happen like that. I've never dealt with a situation where when we were doing adoptions, step-parent adoptions, we also charged, I think it was 500 Rand or 1,000 Rand at the time. That was 13 years ago. And but that is a little bit different from adopting an abandoned baby, or a child or a baby that's in the RACAP system. But as far as I know, it usually doesn't happen like that. What can happen is maybe the people pay, and then there wasn't a child that they could match to the family at the time. So it's not a matter of them paying and not getting a child. It depends on the age group of the child they want, the race of the child they want, the gender of the child they want. So all of those things, I think, can be a factor in people maybe paying and not getting a child immediately, because there's certain processes that has to happen with regards to that. But like I said, I'm not doing adoptions at the moment, so please understand I'm giving information based on what I've heard from colleagues and what I've spoken to some of my colleagues about the last few days before having the session today. So as far as I know, that's not something that happens often. If it happens, it's in rare situations, and there's usually reasons for it.
Thank you, Sanet. Are there any other questions before we close? Thank you for all the information, and there are agencies that you can also contact should you consider adopting.
Yeah, sorry, Connie, I just wanted to say that the National Coalition for there's an N for children, National NACSA, National Coalition for Adoption. They have a website, and on that website, all of the NPOs are apparently mentioned there that are dealing with adoptions, and which anyone who is interested can communicate with and go through their screening process, and they will explain exactly to them how to deal with the processes and what is expected of them. And if they are interested, then like I say, they have this sessions for a week where they explain to them exactly what's happening. But in that website of the National Coalition, you can apparently go and look at all of the organizations that are registered to deal with adoptions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sanet. Thank you for everyone for joining. I hope you've been provided with enough information to make an informed decision about adoption, because it's not something people speak about. And yeah, thank you once again. Thank you, Sanette. Thanks, everyone. If we can just close our eyes for a word of prayer before we go. Dear Lord, thank you so much for bringing us onto this platform. Father, we just ask you to lead and guide. There are so many children who are in need of care, who needs to be adopted. And I just ask that you will put the correct children with the correct parents, dear Father, because we can have such an impact on children's lives for eternity, dear Lord. And if that is what you want for us, just open doors and help us to follow the process, and also to follow your leading. Dear Lord, thank you for all the information that could have been provided. Thank you for the people sharing, those that have adopted and have been adopted, and also thank you for Sanette's input and information. We ask that you will give us all a good evening. Bless each and every family represented on this platform this evening as well, dear Father, and give us all a good night's rest is my prayer in your loving name. Amen.